Hello, I am Dr. Zach Nissen here with Dr. Casey Grauer, and together we co-direct the New River Island Project, and we'll be presenting today on an ongoing collaboration with the To'one Masehualoon nonprofit organization. Our talk is titled What's in a Name? A Collaborative History of the Dzuluinicob New River in Corozal, Belize.
Place names are manifestations of relationships between people and the landscapes they inhabit. When we ask the question, who has the ability to name something, place names can also reveal power relationships. Changes in naming conventions over time illustrate the complexity of these relationships. Many place names in Belize are derived from Spanish or English due to legacies of colonialism. European settlers seized lands from indigenous Maya people for extraction, accumulation, and profit, often naming the stolen land after themselves. By placing their names upon the land, these extractive colonizers were attempting to erase indigenous claims and institute legal systems that benefited settlers. In this presentation, the New River Island Project, an archaeological project run by academics from the US, along with To'one Masehualoon, an indigenous Maya NPO located in Corozal town, consider the histories of colonial and Maya place names in northeastern Belize. In order to forefront indigenous history, we present evidence from historical documents that discuss Maya place names and reveal different relationships to the New River. We reflect on this data to consider the landscape's history and the resiliency of Maya communities in northeastern Belize. The goal of this collaboration is to consider the impact of historical biases and to be mindful of how these histories shape people's lives in the present.
In 1618, two friars, Bartolome Fuensalida and Juan de Orbita, made a trip from coastal Bacalar to inland Tipu, during which they sailed down the Rio Nuevo, or what is today called the New River. While their original work has been lost, Friar Diego Lopez de Cogolludo later republished an account that survives. The friars described going through the mouth of the New River and encountering three settlements before Lamanai, the first of which they called Punqui. Grant Jones has noted other historic mentions of this settlement, including a 1622 account of new assignments for encomenderos of several villages, one of which was Punqui. However, by 1641, Fuensalida reports many of the previously identified settlements were quote-unquote deserted, with many of the former occupants having joined rebel forces at Tipu. Names in the records have different spellings, but indicate indigenous Maya settlement along the river when Spanish and British colonial authorities first surveyed the New River. While these are the first recordings of the settlement along the New River, their histories and the significance to the people that live there transcend the fragmentary evidence found in colonial records. Further, despite indigenous Maya communities having occupied the landscape long before the arrival of Europeans, Maya groups are often described in historic documents as refugees or rebels that posed a threat to colonial governments. Colonial encounters then with Maya communities provide insight into the people living in the area prior to Spanish colonial and British colonial control over the area. Before the river was called the Rio Nuevo, or New River, it was called Dzuluinicob. The Dzuluinicob refers to both an indigenous Maya territory or region south of Bacalar, along which now is known as the New River, as well as a name for the river itself. The political center of the Dzuluinicob territory was Tipu, whose inhabitants may have been known in the 17th century as Muzul. Though conflict with the Spanish and Maya resulted in unstable control of the region between 1544 and 1707, with the center of governance shifting between Bacalar and Tipu. Dzuluinicob or Dzuluinicob is often translated as Rio del Extranjero in Spanish and River of Foreigners or River of Foreign People in English. While this definition may immediately lead people to consider the colonial history of the river, as we previously described, the name itself comes from the pre-colonial Maya, illustrating the rich history of the river as a site of trade and interaction between culturally diverse groups of people. Grant Jones argues that the River of Foreigners name was given by the Itza Maya of northern Yucatan, and that foreign in this translation means those who were, quote, from beyond known lands, people whose unknown territories were true frontiers of the civilization they knew, end quote. While documentary sources indicate the name came with a negative connotation, it is important to consider the political nature of writing down history and then again in the act of translating names from Yucatec Mayan to Spanish and then again into English. Deborah Walker actually suggests that the name might more accurately be translated as, quote, river for foreigners, end quote, to indicate the role the river played in facilitating commerce and trade across different political and geographic locales. Thomas Guterjan and colleagues add further nuance to this translation, stating that, quote, in modern Yucatec, the best gloss for Dzul is not actually foreigner, but quote unquote gentleman, with connotations of wealth, education, and power. Thus, the name could mean the province of the genteel, wealthy, or powerful, end quote. Guterjan and colleagues further explain, however, that in Yucatan, province names were typically patronymic and derived from the leading families and towns of the province, and thus suggest that the Dzuluinicob territory may be named after a settlement named Dzul, and mean land of the Dzul lineage, though no settlement has been reported in the historic documents with this name. Here, we just want to emphasize the importance of understanding variation and ambiguity in the historical documents and accounts. To further illustrate this point, we return to the writing of Spanish priests Fuenzalida and Cogolludo.
In 1641, Fuenzalida and his companions made the same passage along the New River, except many of the settlements, including what they called Pune or Punqui, were, quote, deserted by their inhabitants who joined the rebels from Tipu, end quote. While these Spanish accounts suggest a depopulation of the area by 1641, indigenous Maya groups lived in northeastern Belize throughout Spanish and British colonial periods, resisting complete colonial control of the region through their knowledge of local waterways and skills at navigating the bush. Furthermore, Miss Adela notes that the descriptions of indigenous groups as rebels creates a relative distinction between indigenous and European groups that moralizes certain actions, while simultaneously ignoring the historical fact that Spanish colonizers forcibly removed indigenous people from the landscape and naturalizing their control over the region. So it's possible that we actually know the location of the village of Buunqui. As shown on this slide, LiDAR survey has identified a small Maya settlement on the northernmost part of this island in the New River. Today, this part of the New River is called the Pembroke Hall Branch because of the Pembroke Hall Plantation. The river island used to be called Pembroke Hall Key, but today it has no official name. We have been calling it the New River Island, following the present-day official name of the river. But if we want to center indigenous Maya history of the area, it is probably more appropriate to call it by a Maya name. Pu'unqui can be found in Barrera Vazquez's 1980 Diccionario Maya, which he defines as a, quote, curved or arched ankle, a population located on the banks of the New River within the area that belonged to the province of Chactemal, currently Belizean territory, end quote. It is worth noting that the settlement investigated by the New River Island Project is located just south of a major bend in the river that may be akin to such an arch or a curve, which is easily visible in this plan view on the map. Experientially, the bend is also extremely evident when traveling up or down the river. Historical accuracy isn't really the point here, as sources of historical information can be fragmentary or biased representations of the past. The river and the island have had many names throughout history, and when we retell the history of the landscape, it is important to consider the implications of the historical narratives we put forward, and be aware of the consequences those narratives have for people today. To think about that further, we now turn to our collaborators in To'one Masehualoon.
Hello, my name is Adela, and Andy, Chuk, and I will be presenting on the topic What's in a Name? The Chactemal Maya Temple sits on Santa Rita Estate in Corozal, Belize. This site corresponds to the ancient Maya province of Chactemal. The temple is dated at 1200 BC. It was an important trade center because of its proximity to the Corozal Bay. In 1511, the earliest invaders made contact with the Maya at Chactemal. The great Maya leader King Nachan Khan was in power and continued to fiercely defend the Maya lands. In 1531, when the invader Alonso Davila ordered him to submit to Spain and to pay tribute, he responded, I will give you turkeys in the shape of spears and corn in the shape of arrows. Davila was promptly chased out of Chactemal province. Since the temple sits on the Santa Rita estate, its original name has been stripped, and hence it is referred to as the Santa Rita Archaeological Reserve. There is no documented records of its inherent Maya name, the irony being that the Maya temple bears a Spanish name. In reference to the murals of Chactemal, discovered by Thomas Gann in 1900, he writes, in the mounds of northern Honduras. Quote, after I had traced the outline of about half of the mural paintings, some mischievous Indians, in reference to the indigenous people, came in the middle of the night and removed the whole of the stucco. This is especially to be regretted, as towards the broken end of the wall a number of hieroglyphs were massed together, which were entirely lost. End of quote. Hence, we do not know what the readings of the glyphs were. If there was any indication or reference to the name of the temple, we may never know, as Gan was not interested in any scholarly findings or archaeological interpretations. He was primarily interested in personal collecting and illegal export of the Maya artifacts, and engaged in excessive use of dynamite at the digging sites. But what's in a name? Countless scholars, readings, and educators refer to our sacred Maya temples as ruins. Definition of ruins: destruction of something or the state of being destroyed. Our temples are sacred structural sites that have stood for many centuries, the place where our ancestors met to perform sacred rituals and gathered for sacred games. They held many exploited treasures and continue to hold unrevealed secrets and mysteries. As depicted in the image, some of the artifacts from Belize, and today many people come from afar to extract knowledge that may be useful in today's society. We request refrain from using the term ruins and try on the term sacred Maya temples. And now a word from Andy Chook.
Name change follows land claim. For example, in 1841 in Yucatan, Zitno became Barbachano, Zibenecao became Iturbide, Put became Moreno, Cocobchen became Zavala, Cholul became Libre Unión, To became Mérida, Noacap became Progreso, Saki became Valladolid. The Maya names were replaced with Spanish names. The water protection was removed and access to water was denied. There was competition for water. The water that was free became costly. As the population increased in the region, there was migration to the south and the southeast region. Any land that belonged to the Maya natives was considered free for all. With migration and land claims, what followed was name change. Subsequently, since the land needed to be attended to, the plantations needed laborers. Later, this led to forced labor and servitude of the indigenous people of Yucatan. What seemed as a small, significant name change was the premise for the more than 50 years social war of Yucatan, known as the Case War of Yucatan, known in our Mayan language as Nohoch Battle. It took us more than 4 months to come up with a name that reflects the objective of To'one Masehualoon, Cultural Preservation Group. When we see the word To'one Masehualoon, we proudly reaffirm that we are Maya. We are here. We are alive on as a people, and we continue to struggle and actions of preservation, self-identification, and autonomy. The remaining of places the renaming of places, rivers, and archaeological sites to the original name before colonization is an important step in the decolonization process, one which would connect many to the history before the Europeans, a history which many times is ignored or not taught. It would be a process of cultural revitalization and preservation, one which could be a step in strengthening and preserving Maya language. With the continuation of the use of colonial names, and here we have some examples like the New River in Belize. It was changed from the word Dzuluinicob. Santa Rita site, its original name is Chactemal. The Rio Hondo, original name is No Okun. And these are just some examples of claiming and reclaiming our history. Yum Botik Kanantabayesh.